Act Out is completely non-corporately funded, independent activist news, so we need your help to keep it going. To become a patron of Act Out, visit patreon.com/actout. This week on Act Out, we shift from histories to her stories with a revolutionary rundown of incredible women from around the globe and throughout the ages. Next up, Nick Brana, former outreach coordinator for Bernie Sanders, talks about his latest effort to draft Bernie in forming a new People's Party. From tweets to marching in the streets, this is Act Out. Welcome to Act Out. I'm Eleanor Goldfield, and this is your tipping point. Now, as mentioned last week, this week, today, in fact, if you're watching this on Wednesday, is International Women's Day. To hear about why that's ironic, check back to last week's episode. To set our focus on some incredible women you likely have never heard of, stay with us for this revolutionary rundown. So, part of our jobs as activists is to remember and analyze the past so that we may learn from the mistakes and the triumphs, but also so that we can lift up the memory of those the system hopes to erase. To pick up where all of our schools and our histories or his stories failed, where the veils of patriarchy, misogyny, and the sidekicks of racism, colonialism, and capitalism have covered the efforts and achievements of women in everything, from science to social justice. Indeed, our job as women activists and men or non-binary allies is to pull the veil back, to uncover the work of these women so that we can not only be inspired by them, but so that we may learn from their struggles and apply that knowledge to our battles today. Now, alas, this is but a microscopic and very brief sampling, but this list might serve as an introduction, one that you can and should build upon. So in no particular order, let's start with Qi Jin, feminist revolutionary and writer in late 19th, early 20th century China. Not satisfied to live as a quiet housewife, Jin left China and her family in her 20s to study in Japan, adopting male clothing and a nickname meaning challenger of men. She joined several radical groups working to overthrow the Qing dynasty and wrote extensively on the role of women in both the political and intellectual spheres, becoming a feminist in a hyper-male-dominated place and time. Upon her return to China after being expelled from Japan, she ran a secret military training academy before ultimately being found out and executed by the government, due in no small part to her stubborn refusal to remain silent or covert in her political and social opinions. Berta Cáceres, an indigenous Honduran environmental activist and co-founder of the Council of Popular and Indigenous Organizations of Honduras, or COPIN. This organization, under Cáceres' guidance, battled a series of dirty and destructive energy projects, including the world's largest dam builder, Sino Hydro, who in 2013 withdrew a proposed project due to COPIN's unwavering pressure. Despite many threats of murder and violence, she persisted, knowing full well that her life was on the line as she fought for planet and people. And last March, she was assassinated. Her government's fingerprints, and thereby our government's, thanks in no small part to Hillary Clinton, are all over her murder. Niwan Yarawa, an incredible woman of whom there is no individual picture, she led hundreds of Igbo women in revolt in the late 1920s Nigeria in what is now called the Igbo Women's War, and it all began with a sit-in. Niwan Yarawa organized a group of women to stage what was called Sitting on a Man against Warrant Chief Okugo, an openly tyrannical tool of the British government who had oppressed one too many, one too often for her to accept. Okugo's response to the peaceful sit-in, which included singing and dancing outside of his house, was to drive a spear through one of the women's feet, shoot a pregnant woman with an arrow, and set his own house on fire in order to blame the women for it. The protests then spread. Anger over the new taxes, but even more so the British colonial government and their appointed warrant chiefs, inspired women to take to the streets. And yet still, officials ignored them. So they took it up a notch. They attacked European stores, banks, and courts, knocked down telegraph poles, and cut wires. They did not, however, hurt anyone. And that's important to note because the British response was to open fire and kill more than 50 women and set fire to whole villages. In the end, the colonial authorities did ditch their plans for new taxes and curtailed the power of the warrant chiefs. What's known as the Igbo Women's War was one of the first large-scale and partially successful challenges to British rule in West Africa. Excuse me. Since we're on the subject of breaking shit and not hurting anyone, Emmeline Pankhurst, a British woman who proudly called herself a hooligan, Pankhurst was the Black Bloc wing of the suffragette movement in England in the early 1900s. Having seen no advancement in women's rights after years of peaceful pandering and calm protests, she organized a militant group of women to, among other things, break windows, bomb houses, burn a train station, cut phone wires, throw rocks at the crown jewels, and toss a hatchet into the Prime Minister's carriage, all without injuring anyone, and all to get the right to vote. She was arrested several dozens of times, but was always released after 1 to 2 days due to her staunch refusal to eat, drink, or sit down. Throughout the course of the British suffragette movement, women were jailed and tortured regardless of the actions they took, peaceful or no. Which is another reason that Pankhurst saw no reason to remain docile. In 1918, women in Britain over the age of 30 were given the right to vote. Unfortunately, she died 1 month before the vote was extended to all women over 21 years later. Phoolan Devi, known as the Bandit Queen, was born to one of the lowest castes in India, an untouchable, as they call it. At age 11, she was married off to a 33-year-old man who beat and raped her, so she left. Which sounds fair to you and me, but for that place and time, that was absolutely unthinkable. After walking the width of Texas to get back home, having her family suggest an honorable suicide, going to the police for help, getting gang raped, and becoming branded as a sex worker, she was kidnapped at the behest of her cousin, who had in fact stolen her family's land. Interestingly enough, she became good friends with the second in command of her kidnappers and joined the band in robbing trains, kidnapping, ransoming, and other bandity things. She also got a hold of her oppressors, beating her ex-husband and mutilating his genitals, killing the cop who had spread the rumor of her being a sex worker. Over the course of the next few years, she would be kidnapped by rival bandits, gang raped again, and ultimately once again amass a small army to destroy her oppressors. Fast forward to 1996, after laying down her arms in 1983 and serving jail time, she ran for and won a seat in the Indian Parliament, dedicating her life to fighting for the oppressed. She was assassinated in 2001, supposedly as revenge for the Bethme massacre, where she murdered 22 men responsible for her last kidnapping, rape, and the murder of her lover, the second in command of her bandit gang. Sylvia Rivera, an LGBTQIA activist who was one of the leading forces behind the Stonewall Rebellion, the event most widely considered to be the birth of the LGBTQIA rights movement in the U.S. Together with her friend Marsha P. Johnson, she founded the Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, or STAR, an organization that provided food, shelter, and guidance to young drag queens, trans kids, and other members of the LGBTQI community in New York City. She is also a founding member of the Gay Liberation Front and the Gay Activist Alliance. While she went by Sylvia, she spoke of gender without any absolutes, calling herself at times a gay man, a gay girl, a drag queen, and a street queen. In this way, she was also at the forefront of a now growing understanding of gender fluidity and non-binary identity. The Night Witches, or the 588th Night Bomber Aviation Regiment, Russian female pilots during the Second World War who battered the Nazis on the Eastern Front via wooden planes. Yes, wooden planes. Using makeshift planes that had been set aside for crop dusting or destruction even, the Night Witches, led by Marina Raskova, dropped bombs on the Germans every single night for 3 years, without the use of any armor, guns, sights, radio, cockpit, brakes, parachutes, or any navigation machinery. Again, wooden fucking planes. They earned their name due to the fact that they had to turn off their engines when flying overhead of the Nazis, because the engines were so loud that they wouldn't effectively surprise the enemy if they left them on. The resulting whoosh overhead just before the bomb drop is how they became known as Nachthexen, or Night Witches. Despite these ridiculous planes, intense and truncated trainings, 14-hour days, and little to no support from the male-dominated military, of the 200 Night Witches that flew during the war, only 32 were lost. Josephine Baker, a woman who never chose between activism and entertainment. Baker was an American expat who made a home in France and a career worldwide as a singer, actress, and dancer. During the Second World War, she used her role as an entertainer to funnel information to the Allies, becoming a valuable spy for the resistance. After the war, she shifted her activism towards the civil rights movement, working closely with the NAACP and Martin Luther King Jr. She adopted children from a variety of backgrounds, calling them her rainbow tribe, further challenging social norms for both race and gender. Throughout her career, Baker's performances also challenged not only racist stereotypes of what blacks should and could do, but also what women should and could do, infusing cabaret numbers with slapstick comedy routines and varied dance styles. The Rojava Revolution in Syria. The Committee of Diplomacy of Congrea Star is a congregation of women's organizations in Rojava, Syria, that released a 33-page report on their work in 2005. The overarching message was simple. Without the liberation of women, a truly free society is impossible. The report outlines how this predominantly Kurdish women-led movement is doing more than just surviving in a war zone. They're thriving and building an egalitarian society while protecting each other and resisting the Islamic State. Their work seeks to also dismantle the patriarchal hold on knowledge and education by teaching women's rights as well as self-defense and women's history. Assemblies and communes meet frequently to further discuss and propagate information and studies, as well as deal with everyday items such as the distribution of energy and water. Now again, this list is but a really tiny, minuscule example of badass revolutionary women throughout the ages. So much of our legacy as strong women has been erased, covered up by insecure and scared men, covered up by hate and greed, colonialism, capitalism, white supremacy, and in many cases, complicity. On this International Women's Day, instead of just posting some selfie with a hashtag heart emoji women or some shit like that, why don't you find out about a revolutionary woman who fought for justice, who fought for freedom? Then take something from that and fold that into who you are. Regardless of whether you're male, female, or somewhere else on that spectrum, we can all learn and grow from the power of the women who marched before us. Be patient, calm down, wait your turn, do sit down, lower your voice, change your tone. That's your choice, you're on your own. Raise your hand if you're on your own. Raise your hand if you've rattled thrones. Raise your hand if you've been cut down, told you're divisive when being decisive, told to just wait and see how this plays out. Raise your fist if you're over this shit. Raise your fist if you're ready to stand, only to sit when you're shutting shit down with the system, down with the patriarchy, the capitalist oligarchy, down. Rise for the fight, the floods of our light, the shedding of night. We are day. Our voices are symphonies, anger arranged, the beauty of boldness, determined resolve. We are the past that now has evolved. We are the next fight right now. This is our place and our time. Don't turn it around. Don't fall in the gutters that history carved. Don't kneel to the masters by who you've been bound. Don't burn it all down to build up the charred. Don't repeat the defeat that gave us these scars. Don't fall for reforms that deforms, that maim, that already wrecked Lady Liberty's name. Don't fall for the lies that come from on high. Don't tie yourself down to ideas underground. Don't strap yourself in for this ism or spin. Don't hold onto ships that are sinking in pride. Be alive. Be the fluid like water is life. Be the waves that can drown out this strife. Be the movement. Be shifting. Be change. Be evolved, rearrange, but never be patient, calm down, wait your turn, do sit down. Don't lower your voice, change your tone, that's your choice. You're not alone. We are not alone. For more stories on incredible women, check out rejectedprincesses.org, a veritable treasure trove of powerful, no-shit-taking women from around the globe and throughout the ages. If clicking through that site doesn't get you jacked up to topple some empires, then you just don't have a central nervous system. Now, moving on, even critics of the Democratic Party will point out that what still separates the Dems from the Republicans is the Dems' stance on social issues like gay marriage or abortion, things like that. And while that's true-ish, as you noticed from our previous rundown, Dems only really care about you if you're a well-off American white woman. Berta Cáceres was of no concern to Clinton, nor were the thousands of Saudi women living as slaves under an autocratic, patriarchal regime, or the women and children of Haiti, displaced by and or now working at a garment factory that Clinton pushed through in a rush deal as Secretary of State. Or how about the women and children, mostly single mothers, dragged further into destitution and poverty by Democratic policies that slashed welfare programs and bolstered Wall Street? In short, it's not about whether the Dems talk about social issues. It's about what they do. It's about whether or not they actually value your life and well-being above the well-being of their stock portfolios. And while I urge all of you to look into that answer on your own, in the interest of time, I'll go ahead and tell you that, no, they don't give a flying fuck about you. So what's to be done? Well, former Bernie Sanders outreach coordinator Nick Brana has one idea. Last month, he launched the Draft Bernie campaign in an effort to coax Bernie into spearheading the founding of a new People's Party. For more on this, we sat down with Nick to discuss a new party, a unified duopoly, and next steps. Take a look.
So right now what we have in the Democratic Party is there are two parties. There's progressives, and then there's the Democrats, kind of the traditional corporate establishment Democrats. And their ideas are so widely separated that those are two different parties. They should be. You know, and the Democratic Party is much closer to the Republican Party, you know, and those two parties are, I mean, the differences between them have just shrunk over time. From my experience with working with the superdelegates and working with party elites, is that their mentality is nothing close to anything progressive. You know, they have more contempt for progressives than they do Republicans. They see us as like invaders coming into their home. You know, they had a nice thing going, right, you know, and we're coming in and kind of screwing the place up.
So what was that like, being part of this progressive campaign and reaching out to the establishment Democrats?
It was actually horrible. I'll be honest. I joined this radical campaign not being entirely certain what I was going to do on it. But knowing that I wanted to put, my skills to use to contribute to this. And I ended up on the one part of the campaign that was actually reaching out back to the establishment. And so it was our job to convince the superdelegates, after Bernie spent each day bashing them as the party establishment, to then support us, you know, and they were uninterested. I mean, they were totally uninterested. They were uninterested in the issues. They didn't care about the issues. I tried to have issue discussions with them, and I just kind of, I started to give up after a while because they were offended, actually, to talk about the issues.
I guess a lot of people have been calling for different parties. Do you think that the U.S. should remain a two-party system? Isn't it a little bit easier to maintain the the gears of corruption in just a two-party state, or as Chomsky says, like a one-party state with two different sides to it? Or is the idea that you'll create a third party and then you'll have space for more parties to come up? What is your real vision with that?
Right. So the platform and the party bylaws and the name and the logo and all of this, I don't think it should be determined by me or Bernie or any one person. It should be determined by the people at the founding convention. But what I believe that the party should do, and what I would like to see it do, is what you mentioned. Right now, we are a two-party system thanks to the spoiler effect. And so we need somewhat, in the transition from where we are to where we want to be, we need some kind of plan to beat the establishment within this labyrinth that they've built for us, And we can do that with Bernie if we recruit him to found a new party and bring over the millions of people, just like Lincoln and Van Buren did when he brought over millions of people from the Whig Party to the new Republican Party and replaced it in 4 years. And so that's what I would like to see this party do, essentially. And when we do hopefully replace the Democratic Party, I would like to see this party open up the electoral system in a way that we haven't seen in this country and break down those barriers. And I think that would be the most symbolic show of our principles, essentially, and of keeping ourselves kind of honest. Because you're right. It's a lot. When you look at this country, a lot of what you find is that it's designed in a way to be easily controlled, by corporations, by elites. And so two parties are a lot easier to control than 6 or 12. And so I think what the new party should do, I would hope, and I hope that people agree with me on this, is that when we form our platform, we write into it that we want to completely overhaul the electoral system. It's always been kind of ironic to me about how progressives, when it comes to electoral politics, forget the logic of monopolies. So the Democratic Party, as is, has a monopoly on the left. Without competition, there's nowhere else for people on the left to go. And that's why that's the essence of the spoiler effect. It's kind of this hostage relationship that they have with us. But we've reached the point where so many people have left the Democratic Party, especially since the election. 14 million people have left since the election. That's 20% of what the Democratic Party was in early November. That really independents are the party now. Yeah. There's about 44% of the country is independents. 57% of the country says they want a new party, a new major party. And so, we're kind of pulling our hair here as progressives saying, how are we ever going to take back the minority? Instead, let's go create a party that actually represents working people. It represents the views that Bernie espoused, which happen to be the views that most Americans support on the issues, and create a party that actually represents people.
Curious, because there are other parties that exist, whether that's the Green Party, the Socialist Alternative. Why not build with them as opposed to starting a new party?
Because any third party, it has to have two things to succeed, in my mind. First, it has to have critical mass of support. None of those parties do. And we just went through an election with the two most despised candidates in U.S. history, practically. And yet still, neither the Green Party, the Libertarian Party, none of the smaller third parties could crack 5% to get minor party designation.
Made it to 7, but I don't think the Greens did.
The Greens certainly did not. Yeah, I think the Greens were either 1 or 2%. And so that's why the spoiler effect is so crushing. It's so crippling to parties that are trying to rise in a way where they're trying to build essentially from nothing up. And that's why in our own history, that has never worked. What has worked is when somebody from the old regime brings over millions of people, when a party has stopped representing its base. And that's exactly what we have now. That's what the Whig Party was back in the 1850s, in that it was still a pro-slavery party, but its base was abolitionist. And so the Republican Party, came about and gave them a home that actually represented their views, and we could do the same thing here. And so that's why I think it would be easier to start a new party than to try to build one of the existing parties. That's right.
So part of the caveat, if you will, is that you're not just calling for a third party or a new party. You're calling for an engaged populace, which is sort of, that's like the bane of any activist's existence is how the hell do I get people to pay attention? Do you see the creation of this party as an impetus for citizen engagement? So is it basically kind of like doing two things at once? You're creating an alternative party, but you're also pushing people to become engaged?
Absolutely. The traditional model for a political party in our system is they want you to pull a lever every 4 years or 2 years, and they want you to go away. They don't want you to vote on party officers, DNC chair. No, don't be involved in that. Don't be involved in what we're doing otherwise. What I have in mind is something entirely different. This is kind of like a movement party. It's a movement first that has an electoral wing that the Democrats really plan on facilitating the move to the right, just like they've been doing for the past several decades. And so the concept that I have for a new party, the concept that Draft Bernie has, is that we're going to create a party that actually is the movement itself. We're just going to give it an electoral wing to go with it. And so we're going to mobilize to do all of the things, like oppose the pipelines that are being built, like in North Dakota, no DAPL, and all of the things that Trump is doing as well. So we're going to be the resistance to that, and a real resistance, not a fake resistance that's approving his cabinet nominees. So it'll be just an entirely different conception of a party, a much more democratic and engaged conception, I think.
For more on Nick's campaign to draft Bernie, visit draftbernie.org. And that'll do it for this week's Dose of Dissent. Thank you so much for watching. Please spread and share this with all your friends, foes, and people you don't know. Check out the last slide to see the sites mentioned in this week's show, and be sure to follow us on Twitter, on Facebook, and subscribe on YouTube. From The Devil's Den, good night and act out. And real quick, to keep independent, non-corporatized media like this show going, donate at Occupy.com/donate. If you'd like to donate directly to Act Out, visit Patreon.com/actout.